Welcome to another episode of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Meg Heaton, and I've lived in Hudson for close to 30 years now, and most of that time I was a reporter with the Hudson Star-Observer. But I recently retired, and I've become involved in an initiative to make our community more dementia-friendly. Just like cancer, it's likely that every family will be touched by the disease of dementia at some point. And like the early days in cancer treatment, there is often a lot of stigma associated with it. But that's changing, in part because of people like our guest tonight. This program is one of several we are presenting to talk about what it's like living with dementia and what resources are available to help families and friends come to terms with it and live well. My guests are Emily Smith, to my left. Emily grew up in Hudson with her siblings and her parents, Jennifer and the late Craig Smith. When her dad, an iron worker and a Hudson firefighter, was diagnosed with a type of dementia known as frontal temporal dementia, he was just 49 years old. And his and Emily's relationship changed forever with that diagnosis. As his disease progressed, she assumed the role of his primary caregiver and was committed to his well-being right up until the time of his death this summer at the age of just 54. Emily remains committed to helping others deal with the disease that took her dad and to educating the community not just about the nature of dementia, but what we can do to support families living with it. We are also joined on my right by my good friend Nancy Abrahamson, the dementia care specialist with the Adult and Disability Resource Center of St. Croix County. Nancy's job includes many things: educating the public about dementia, conducting memory screenings, memory cafes, helping businesses and organizations become dementia friendly. But her primary function is helping people like Emily and her family navigate their lives living with dementia. I want to thank you both for being here today. And Emily, let's start. Why don't you tell us about your dad and how this disease impacted your family?
So when my dad was in his early 40s, he started to change as a person. And as he got to his mid-40s and then his late 40s, he became very erratic, and his behavior was abnormal. It was off. We saw things that were deemed inappropriate in society happen. And he couldn't regulate money. He couldn't manage his emotions. He became kind of violent at times. He was like a different person.
And very much different from the man that you grew up with.
Yes, very much. He wasn't the same loving, caring parent I used to have.
What steps did you guys take?
So the first thing we did was we brought my dad to the Mayo, and at the Mayo, they diagnosed him with a polyp in his nose, and the thought was that he had a fungal polyp in his nose and that removing that polyp was going to cure him, and that's why he was being weird. And when they removed that polyp, nothing really changed, so then they continued with neurodiagnostic testing. He got an incorrect diagnosis of Parkinson's, and then a physician kind of said he has frontal temporal dementia, and we just really didn't believe it, and we kind of just left the Mayo. And I think kind of what bothers me about that is we had my dad talk to his family practice physician in his mid-40s about this memory loss and behavior changes that he was experiencing, and he was just given the message that as we age, memory loss is normal. And so if we had gotten a diagnosis then, I think we could have prevented a lot of the behaviors that led up to us going to the Mayo.
So that was several years before you went to the Mayo?
Yes.
That he approached his primary physician and basically got told, this is just the way life is.
Yes. Yep, that is correct. So then after the thing with the Mayo, we kind of, didn't really know what to do. And he got increasingly violent to the point where my parents had to get divorced to protect my sister. He moved out to a property that one of our other family members owned and was still working. And one day he collapsed at work, and they brought him to Regions. And I remember when he was there, I fought with the social worker and that family member that he needed to get diagnosed with dementia officially. Begrudgingly, that family member brought him to a neurodiagnostic technician who did the testing, and then through his neurologist, he got the official diagnosis of temporal dementia.
Mm-hmm. How did you and Nancy hook up?
So that, I think, was the first of many hard changes for my dad. His union kind of said, Craig, you have to retire after this.
This is once he was officially diagnosed, right?
Once he was officially diagnosed, and actually they kind of said after he had collapsed at work that, you know, you're really too sick and we can tell you're sick, to come back. So we would see my father very limited amounts of time because he was kind of in an abusive situation. And when we would go and see him, he would meet us places, and we were noticing he would continuously be skinnier and skinnier. When we would see him, he was bones.
Mm-hmm.
It was very upsetting to see. And so I would call the county because that's really the only thing I knew to do to protect him. And eventually,
and he was a slim man anyway.
He was. So I mean, when I'm saying he was skinny, he was not healthy skinny. It was too thin and just bones. And so I would call the county, and I needed help, and I knew he shouldn't be driving. I knew he was cooking for himself, and he shouldn't be cooking. And so I know that Nancy and then Bonnie, who's the adult protection worker in St. Croix County, went out and visited Craig a few times. And then one time, Bonnie called me and actually said I should go with. And it was at that point that I met Nancy, and that's when I finally started to feel like I could get the help to get my dad out of that bad situation and into assisted living where he really needed to be.
Mm-hmm. Is this kind of the way it operates, Nancy, or how does it usually happen?
Every situation is different. The good news is that Emily was open to seeking resources, and that once we met, I was able to help them understand the nature of the disease. So while the behavior is difficult to handle, both emotionally and physically sometimes, it's normal for that disease. And so we could talk about strategies and resources and that kind of thing. So every case is different, but there are a number that come to me via the Adult Protective Service Unit.
And meaning that they're either in an abusive situation
or self-neglect, self-endangerment.
Okay, that's part of it too.
Or endangering the public.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you even know, I had never heard of frontal temporal dementia before a friend of mine was diagnosed with it, but did you know anything about it at all?
I had never honestly heard of it. I knew there was dementia. I didn't know people in their 50s got dementia. I didn't know people in their 40s got dementia. I didn't know there was different types of dementia. I thought everyone who had dementia just had dementia, or you had Alzheimer's, and that was what you had. So one of the first things I really did was I got online, and I really researched frontal temporal dementia because I felt like I needed to know as much as I could about what was going to happen to him and what he was going through to be able to just, relate to him and take care of him properly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a dementia that often strikes younger people, so they're less likely to be diagnosed. They're more likely to be labeled as a behavior issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to learn about it.
One of the things that strikes me about Emily's story is that she was very proactive in terms of seeking help. Is that, to even go looking for resources to take over the role of caregiver, even though your folks got a divorce, that's still not a role you were used to being in with your dad, taking over for your dad at that young age. Is that do people come to you for help pretty regularly, or is that something that we don't know enough about?
I'm very busy. I think the people that navigate this disease the best are the ones that are open to learning and open to using resources, because it's not, as I tell everyone, it's not a journey to be traveled alone. You really have to muster your resources, sort of circle your wagons and plan what you're going to do and have some strategies.
When you became his primary caregiver here,
Yes.
can you give us an idea of how that impacted? Now, you work for Regents Hospital, right, in customer relations, or
Yep.
right? So you have a full-time job.
Yep.
And a life of your own. How did caregiving for your dad impact your life? What happened to your life?
I think I can best explain it by kind of reading through this.
Sure.
I guess since his diagnosis, I have struggled with depression and grief, and I have changed as a person. I have avoided doing many things because I have known that my father that was dependent on me being alive and healthy to have a good life, so I didn't take risks. I didn't seek career advancement or a career that I am capable of doing because I knew that my stress load was too high already as a caregiver.
Yeah. And how was your relationship with the rest of your family? Where'd your siblings fall in this? Because they're a little bit younger than you are.
Yeah, so during this, there really was no one else to be my dad's caregiver and do this role. My sister was a minor, and my brother was in college, and I just felt like because I was the oldest and I was,
Sure.
the one farthest in my life, that this was my job to take care of.
You find that families often react to it differently, don't they, Nancy?
Yeah, it's so often directed a little bit by personality. Some people embrace challenges and change, and others really aren't very thrilled by that. They may pull back, they may deny that things are going on, and a lot of it's just because they don't understand it. People are diagnosed and the families are never linked to education. I'm happy to say there are doctors in our community that are doing that now. But there was a time when that really wasn't the case. And even, you went to Mayo and they didn't really help you understand much about it. So you go home and you just sort of flounder. It's like dog paddling in a deep lake.
Yeah.
So I think the people that, there are people who call and they don't even know what to ask. So one of my roles, and I think my skills over the years that have developed, is that I can kind of listen to what they're saying and I can help them frame the questions.
Good way to put it. Emily, when you, as your dad progressed in the disease, were you able to communicate? How much did he realize about what was happening to him, and how did you communicate with him?
He was very, this is really hard to talk about. As he got sicker, he got diagnosed with ALS, and that was devastating for him. And he was very aware of what was going on. He was aware when he lost bladder control. He was aware in his last days. I don't think he ever was not aware of what his situation was.
Really? And did he always know you? And he did?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yep, and kind of memory loss of people isn't something that is as typical with frontal
FTD,
temporal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's more behavioral.
More
Yep.
behavioral.
Yep,
Okay.
and then kind of what we saw was it was really the ALS that more took his life than it was the dementia.
And one of the things we've talked about, obviously, is the stigma that's attached to this. Your dad was well known in the community because of his
Yes.
years as a firefighter and all the other things he did. How did you deal with that, and what did you feel from the people who knew him?
So when he was going out and having his kind of inappropriate behavior, it was very, very embarrassing for us. We felt embarrassed for him. We felt embarrassed for us and our family. And then, you know, once we kind of finally got to get his diagnosis, I felt like we were able to start to explain to people what was going on. There was a really interesting day where when he was honored as the firefighter of the year, I actually was able to explain to the firefighters what his diagnosis was and explain that it was causing some of these behaviors and that that wasn't really the Craig we knew. That was the Craig who had dementia. And I would have to say, I think, you know, him being on the fire department was just incredibly meaningful because the firefighters really honestly stuck by him till the end.
That's nice. That's good to know.
Yeah.
And did you feel support from people?
I did feel support. One of the areas, though, that I think is really important is at some point when just I get a little more used to that my dad's gone. I would like to create a network of young caregivers. I felt alone sometimes because I just didn't feel like I had anyone to relate to. I didn't know anyone who was putting their career dreams on hold. I didn't know anyone who was just putting their life on hold, who, you know, didn't do stuff people in their 20s did, so that they could just take care of their parent.
Yeah, that's not what you expect to be doing at 28 or 29.
Yep, and I think that feeling of alone kind of just, it's stuck with me because no matter how much support and love I was shown by the people who care about me, I still didn't feel like anyone truly understood what I was going through.
Which is why we're doing the whole dementia-friendly community thing, because there's still so much stigma. We don't know. There are people out there with the diagnosis. There are young adults dealing with their parents or a parent with the disease, but nobody wants to talk openly about it, which is why these kinds of shows are good and training businesses is good, so that more and more people can understand the behavior and understand how relationships change. So,
Yep.
I know I heard you speak at the Hudson Community Foundation Forum last fall, Emily, and I think one of the stories that you told about when you had your dad in Target and how he would stare at people because he was trying to remember who they were. Talk a little bit about what that was like.
So one of the things that was really prevalent in my dad's dementia was he would stare at people, and it wasn't staring at people like if I stared at you, it could be like a kind of a considered rude thing. Well, he was actually staring at people because I think he was trying to process that information. And unlike you or I, who could quickly look at someone and then like recognize their face, he would really have to stare at someone for his brain to process through that information. And it just, I remember explaining to people he has dementia so that they wouldn't think he was odd.
I remember you telling that story, and I thought, you know, there's so many instances where I think that comes up, and that, again, speaking to the dementia-friendly community, if we were all more aware of what it looks like, or you could easily just say, gee, he has dementia, and people wouldn't, you know, react so strangely. That's why I think the ability to tell his story when he got the Firefighter of the Year award was probably one of the most impactful things you could have done, you know.
It really was.
It really was, yeah. What do you, looking back now, after his care occupied so much of your time, what was the biggest challenge you faced throughout this process?
I think it was trying to get people to understand just kind of the things I was going through. There was a lot of people who would ask me, oh, why don't you go back to school? Why are you doing the job you're doing? And I would look at them and I honestly would have to say to them, I don't have time to go back to school. Like, that's not reasonable for me. I can't take on job with a lot of responsibility because I need to be able to leave and take care of my dad, or I need to be able to have the energy to take care of him when I come home from work.
And that's what happened. I mean, you
Yeah.
were the first person they called if there was an issue.
Yep.
Plus, when you came home, you spent time with him, saw him every day, probably.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the average person doesn't understand. Not only did he have bills and doctor's appointments and medication and things that needed monitoring, but Emily had her own bills and work issues and relationships and all of those things. There are only so many hours in the day. The challenge for caregiving is maintaining your own mental and physical health.
Yeah.
And the statistics are not good for that, particularly with dementia.
Well, and I mean, I think of that like, I never had that time to work out. I really felt drained by the time I was done being around him and doing all the things for him that, I just didn't have the energy to kind of exercise or take good care of myself. So it is really hard.
It is, and you're thinking for two people
That's true.
continually.
Yep.
You mentioned too, we've talked in the past about the legal side of this and the financial side of this. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, so I want to talk about estate planning. So through estate planning, I was able to feel more comfortable every day with the concept of going on vacation, living the adventurous, fun life I have always loved to live because I had backup plans in place. Estate planning isn't just important for this reason, though. It is important financially. When the people we love have dementia, we know they are going to incur costs at an unknown amount, and those costs will change as their needs change. It's very confusing and a lot of what ifs and whens. I went about estate planning by hiring an estate attorney. After many conversations and a lot of thinking, we set up a trust, pre-planned a funeral, wrote care plans with my dad, and set up durable power of attorney and medical power of attorney. Now that he has passed, estate planning has allowed for an easy transition to probate.
And those are all issues that, again, a caregiver isn't expecting they're going to have to deal with. So to find somebody can sometimes be difficult, right? And
Yeah, we have some great elder law attorneys here.
that's what they're called. Elder law is what you're looking for, right?
Typically, now Craig wasn't an elder.
No, he wasn't.
He was young. He was a middle-ager, but the elder law attorneys really are skilled because they understand that dementia is a protracted disease. It's very progressive and often very slow, and so they can look at the assets and say, this is what you can expect. These are the things that you need to consider and keep in mind. And it's, I've heard caregivers over the years either get good advice or not good advice, and they've had to undo things because they didn't go to an attorney that understood this kind of a disease.
So just like a doctor that maybe doesn't understand,
Exactly.
it's the same with this. If you aren't comfortable with the information you're getting, look again. Or
Yep, and talk to people.
talk to people.
Find out. Caregivers are very willing to share with other caregivers what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, again, that the dementia-friendly community, if we can make these connections between, I mean, your wealth of experience here is, could be so critical to another family. On that note, I mean, if we could maybe kind of talk a little bit in conclusion here, a little bit about advice. What advice, for those finding out, if you can think back to where you were when you first found out and then where you ended up with your dad, what advice would you give people about living with dementia, living life with dementia?
I think, one, hire an estate attorney. That's incredibly important, and
Gives you peace of mind, I
yeah,
imagine.
and so they are called elder law attorneys, and yes, Nancy is correct. They even do elder law for children, so they're just very informed about how to protect people who are disabled. Then the other thing I would suggest is really don't be afraid to stand up to physicians, especially once my dad got the ALS. We ended up in a really uncomfortable position where I had a physician who was very adamant that we needed to put my dad on a feeding tube and on the medication for pseudobulbar effect. And pseudobulbar effect is inappropriate crying and laughter. Well, my dad was already on some pretty strong emotional control medications, and I just kind of said no to both. And they called me about 5 times, and literally they called me till the day I could tell them, my dad is in hospice, stop calling me. To which they couldn't try to force me to put him in a feeding tube anymore. So I think knowing that person's wish was really important for me. I knew he didn't want a feeding tube, and I think knowing that it's okay to say no to physicians, and it's okay to say, I'm not going to do that, I'm in charge. And if you have medical power of attorney, you are in charge.
And on the one hand, you need to follow the wishes of the person who wrote that document, which was your dad. I mean, he had help. But secondly, you know, you are in charge, and the doctors don't know everything. I know caregivers who have interviewed doctors before they've ever hired one. And they have made it very clear that they know their loved one best. They know what meds are not good for them. They know what calms them, and so they want to partner with the doctor. They don't want to overrun the doctor either, but they just want it to go smoothly and be a collaborative approach to care.
I think another thing I want to ask is it's never too early to go into your family practice physician and ask for hospice. I wish I would have asked for hospice earlier than I did. I'm incredibly glad I got him into hospice when I did. But I just think his last 6 months of life could have been a lot nicer had hospice been involved earlier.
That's an excellent point, Emily, because people, we have a misunderstanding really about hospice, that it's only for people who the doctors already know are in a terminal situation. Well, we all are. But what happens with hospice is it can be for other things like failure to thrive, eating, not eating. And people with dementia, for example, may go on and off hospice several times over the course of months or years, which is fine. And that's what hospice is for. Hospice agencies know, so all you have to do is ask and they'll explain it.
And my own experience with hospice is they take as good a care of the family in many instances as they do the person.
Yes, hospice is amazing. You get the support you need, and they listen to you. They care about the patient, and they care about the family. It's a really good thing.
Nancy, can you talk a little bit about the fact that we had the forum last year where Emily spoke along with former Governor Schreiber, whose wife, and she was an elder, and then we had another middle-aged family that was going through, a middle-aged caregiver that was going through it. There's much more openness about this than when you, how long have you been doing this job?
Technically 3 years, but I have 30 years of experience with dementia.
But how has it changed in the course of your work with it?
I want to say that I'm so happy to see the strides that we're making in terms of being open and direct about dementia. I also want to say that in Wisconsin, because the state believes in changing the world's attitudes about dementia and providing support for not just the person with the diagnosis, but the family or caregiving network, that we're very fortunate. We have a lot of resources here as well. Years ago I worked for the Alzheimer's Association, and we were just getting the 24/7 helpline going, so that families have a place to call, night or day. But we have a long way to go because changing attitudes is challenging. People are reluctant to accept that this is a diagnosis. We've never had that problem with other diagnoses like cancer and cardiovascular issues, because it's a disease in the brain, and that's what we struggle with. People are not intentional about their behavior. They're not intentionally forgetting. So I think what's happened is, again, we're being more open, we're developing coalitions, and people are talking with one another and trying to figure out how can we better serve our community. And we see this as a community action.
And I know that you've talked about the fact that you want to continue to do, once you're through this initial process after losing your dad, that you want to continue to work to educate the community as well, right?
Yep. And I don't want another person to feel lonely or lost. I want them to feel like, oh, I can call this person, I can email this person, I can ask this person for help. I want them to know that there's other people who have gone through it or are going through it that really are there for them.
Yeah, really be an advocate for people going through it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both for doing this. There are resources, as Nancy mentioned, across St. Croix County for families and individuals who are dealing with dementia, and we will provide that information as part of this program. The Dementia Friendly Coalition that Nancy mentioned is sponsored by the St. Croix Valley Foundation, and it's at work to make communities across the county dementia friendly. Information about the coalition is also provided here. And then we would like to mention again, the upcoming programs that we have planned will include interviews with more caregivers like Emily, as well as with an elder law specialist here in the area, Jennifer O'Neill, and Dr. Kristen Severson, who specializes in geriatric medicine and the diagnosis and care of those with dementia. I want to thank you both again for being with us and for sharing your stories and your experiences. There's no better teacher, from my experience, than the real thing and the stories that you provide. And we hope that, we know there are probably people watching who will be able to relate immediately to what you're saying. We appreciate very much your willingness to help us all better understand what it's like to live with dementia. Thank you for watching.